Hello and welcome to
Pod.
We are doing a 3-part mini-series on mental health in collaboration with UCL. Today we are discussing autism and we are joined by Kurinchi Gurusamy.
Thank you for being here today and joining us to talk about autism and giving your personal and professional opinion on neurodiversity.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my personal experiences and also share some of the aspects of autism with others. I have written research publications in autism, so I can provide some expert opinion on that as well.
What are some assumptions/misconceptions about autism and those living with it?
The society has lots of assumptions and misconceptions about autism. One of the major misconceptions that the society has is that autistic people have low intelligence quotient. Now, one of the reasons that the society might have such a perception is the developmental delays and disabilities that autistic people have. In reality, most autistic people have normal IQs. Another major misconception that the society has about autistic people is that autistic people lack empathy. I think this is because of the difficulties in communication that people with autism have. For example, I can understand people's joys and sorrows if they are communicated to me in a way that I can understand. But many times, it's not done in a way that I can understand.
Yeah, I know autistic people don't understand sarcasm, but I'm interested in how somebody can speak to you in a way that you can understand, like how they can explain their emotions to you in a way that you can understand.
Just tell me how you feel. If you feel happy about my answer, just tell me I'm happy with your answer. Or if you feel upset with my answer, please tell me that you're upset with my answer. And subtle things just pass just over my head.
You mean like reading body language and passive aggressiveness you don't get, but
Absolutely not. So you'll have to spell it out for me. I'm getting slightly better at some of the sarcastic ways that people say, and I can speak with irony, but I don't understand other people when they speak in a sarcastic way. And if I did understand that somebody was sarcastic about my behavior, they are in for it. That's all I can tell you.
I'm the same.
So do you prefer it when people are more direct with you?
Absolutely. I would simply prefer if somebody said, I am happy or I am unhappy with what you did. Then I then have my options as to whether I should change my behavior or whether they felt unhappy in an unfair way against me and make that decision. So
What was your process for being diagnosed with autism?
I've always had difficulties in social communication, both as a child and as an adult. In 2008, I developed depression, and I had been reading articles about autism in the BBC News websites. And they talk about these difficulties, and I felt that I could be autistic. And one of my classmates, he was a classmate at college. He's now a consultant in psychiatry in Australia. He suggested whether my difficulties could be explained by autism. And it was at that time I really felt that I had autism. And it was a big burden off my shoulder when my friend suggested that. That is because it could explain the differences in the behavior I have from others and also the way I think. And from then on, I could make adjustments to allow me to live a more peaceful life.
It gave you answers.
It gave me answers that I was searching for example, why am I different from others? Why do I behave differently, even though I don't feel like harming others? Even though I am doing something good for the society or for others, why do people misunderstand my behavior? Uh, the diagnosis of autism gave me that answer.
Yeah, I'd imagine you felt seen and understood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are people who are diagnosed with autism at a higher risk of developing mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression?
Yes, people with autism are at higher risk of developing mental health issues. Um, in a recent study conducted by National Autistic Society and Mind, and the survey was published in 2020, it found that more than 90% of people with autism had anxiety, and more than 80% of people had depression. More than 30% of people had major depression. Another report by Autistica indicates that autistic adults without intellectual disabilities had 9 times higher suicidal risk than neurotypical people. They also report autistic children are 28 times at higher risk of thinking about or attempting suicide than neurotypical children.
So why is it that you think that there is such a higher risk of such mental health issues?
The reason why I think there is higher risk of anxiety and depression is because we are different from neurotypical people. And because of this difference, even in school, there is a lot more bullying of autistic children than neurotypical children, simply because they behave differently from others. Um, and this continues because most of the communications are misunderstood by other people, and we have difficulty in understanding other people's communication as well. All of this contribute to mental health issues.
In what ways do you think educational facilities and workplaces can better support young individuals with autism?
It is said that patience is a virtue, and this is very true in the case of autistic people. This is because autistic people are very direct in the way that they talk, and this can be misinterpreted by others as rudeness and arrogance. Autistic people have lots of hypersensitivities. As an example, I am hypersensitive to light and sound. And if you ask me to work in an open plan office, I would struggle. On the other hand, if you ask me to work in a suitable environment, I would be very productive. Same way, teachers should be aware of this hypersensitivity so they can remove the autistic child from the offending stimulus. There are lots of other difficulties that autistic people can face, and this can differ from one individual to another. As an example, I have difficulty with remembering names or faces. Once people understand the difficulties I face, most people are willing to make that reasonable adjustment so that I can carry on with my daily life. And it is that understanding that some people lack, and that makes it difficult for us.
I have heard that there are some autistic people who really excel in certain things, like a lot more like a superpower compared to other
Gonna
people.
say the same thing.
Yeah.
Superpower that they have.
Yeah.
Repetitive behaviors are considered as a part of the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. But it is the same repetitive behaviors that has brought me to this position, because it allows me to focus on these narrow interests that I have, and achieve what I have done. Another thing that I think I am able to do well is to be able to dissociate myself from decisions and emotions. So I am able to make appropriate decisions even when I am in a less than ideal emotional status. I was like when I was young, as a child, I could read a text once or twice, and I could literally recite the whole text. Or when I write, I would even remember a comma. And if you ask me to write the page number of the textbook, I probably could. So I had that sort of a memory. These days, I don't quite have that sort of a memory, but I still am able to remember most of the things. I may not be able to tell the exact phrase, but the general context and general idea, I would have that still, and I'm able to remember things that I read which I don't understand. I still can remember that, and when I read something else related to it, then I can put the first thing into context. That means that the time I spend on learning new things is much less than what somebody without that ability can do. So I would say understanding something in a very quick way is one of the powers I have.
That's a good superpower.
Yeah, a lot of people struggle with making decisions with a level head, so
Yeah.
that's a really great tool to have.
Thank you.
How do you think society can improve in terms of accepting and accommodating individuals of all ages with autism?
If people can accept that there would be people who behave differently from others without meaning any harm to the society, then that's a big step forward. That acceptance would not only help people with autism, but it will also help people with other disabilities. The best thing that people could do is speak to autistic people, find out what difficulties they face, and make some reasonable adjustments to address those difficulties. Usually, this doesn't cost a fortune. It is just a change in the way people approach things. That way, the society can help autistic people. Just accept us as different from others.
So you say communication is probably the best way to make this change, is just to communicate with people on what they need.
Yes, and in a direct way without being subtle.
Okay. I think that's...
Yeah, I think it's always important to approach people in a respectful way. So if you know somebody is autistic, it wouldn't harm you to look up on autism and kind of learn how to approach autistic people.
Absolutely, and to a large extent, we understand others if they explain things as to why they are doing certain things. These things may be implied for normal neurotypical people. Neurotypical people may actually already know why somebody is doing something else, but many times the autistic people may not know why somebody is doing a certain thing or saying a certain thing, and it is just that extra bit of information or communication that's needed, and we are not villains.
No, yeah.
I have a question, but it's like completely nothing to do with any of those. But it was, a question is, so like you obviously with people, you might find it harder to read emotion stuff, but when you're watching like movies and reading books, is it easier or is it harder because you can't communicate with something that's already filmed or something? You just have to process it. Do you process it? Do you think differently or the same?
I feel it is much easier to understand in movies, because in movies they exaggerate things. So they exaggerate emotions. So to a large extent, I do understand emotions in movies. I still have it difficult when there is a new actor because of my difficulty with remembering names and faces, and I had to look at ways of identifying them so I can understand the movie. But other than that, it's much easier to follow movies than real life because actions are exaggerated.
Would you
Thank
say you do well with dramatic personalities then, like people who are really drama queens and exaggerate their feelings in life?
If they exaggerate their real feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes, because sometimes people exaggerate a feeling that is different from their real feeling. So if people are exaggerating their feelings, then absolutely it makes life a lot more easier for me.
Yeah, I know quite a lot of autistic people, and I don't know, it seems like there's definitely something different about them, but in a good way. When I come into contact with an autistic person and I find out they're autistic, it just makes sense. Like there's a part of them that sees things differently to other people. Are there any abilities with autism that you find unique or that stand out?
A proportion of people have intellectual disabilities. Proportion of autistic people have intellectual disabilities, while the majority of the autistic people do not have intellectual disabilities. And generally, autistic people are non-judgmental. Of course, I cannot speak for every autistic person, but it's a feature of autistic people, and that means that people are generally kinder, even if we can't um, show that in our face, or and we may not tell things in the most appropriate time because we don't understand how we feel. We still respect others. This is misconstrued by others because unless you tell me how you feel, I wouldn't be able to tell you the right thing. Whereas you are expecting me to understand your emotions and tell the right thing. So that is a problem. And because we are direct, we may be considered rude and arrogant. So these features dominate, if you want, in some people's mind, while others accept us as we are. And for example, there are people who specifically come to me with advice on a research project, and they know that I'd be critical about the research project, and I tell them. And the answer that they give is, well, that's why we are coming to you. You don't sugarcoat things, and you tell things as you feel, and I'm able to address that, and I'm getting grants because of this. So this is why I'm coming to you. So there are people who appreciate it. There are others who feel offended by how we say things.
Yeah, a good ability that autistic people have is that they do have great attention to detail. And I think they are great people to go to for advice. No matter what the advice is, they definitely are. Yeah.
Certainly, I would be able to give a systematic advice, completely dissociating from any emotions. That would be true for me, but I could also do it for others. So there are people who come to me about difficulties they face, and then I give them some advice, and I am pleased to say that some people at least are feeling better after speaking to me.
How could someone possibly know that they have autism? And are there any common behaviors associated with autism?
Autism spectrum disorder is diagnosed when people have persistent difficulties in social communications and interactions in different contexts, and when people have narrowed and restrictive pattern of behavior and interests. There is no single diagnostic test where you would be able to tell for definite that somebody has autism. For example, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule version 2 is commonly used to diagnose autism in children. It can miss 10% of people with autism, and it can overdiagnose autism in 15 to 20%. The key is to be aware of these symptoms so you can consider the diagnosis of autism when people have these symptoms. But this is also complicated by autistic people trying to mask their symptoms, and this is called camouflaging.
I have heard that it is much harder to diagnose girls than it is boys because girls are good at masking and copying and following the lead, and boys just seem to just be more free and open with their personality, but girls tend to copy and mimic more.
Yes, that is one of the theories that people have put forward for autism diagnosis being commoner in boys than girls. For example, autism diagnosis is typically made around 5 years of age, and it's 4 times commoner in boys than girls. There are various theories as to why this is the case, where more boys have autism than girls. And one of the theories being put forward is the ability of girls to mimic other people's behavior. But this introduces a lot of strain in these people and can lead to poor mental health.
Do you receive a positive or negative reaction from people when disclosing that you are autistic?
I had not disclosed that I was autistic until I had made significant progress in my academic career and done all these achievements. And once I had made all of these achievements, now I am very open that I am autistic. And I get a lot of support from my work colleagues when I say I have autism. But I don't think the society is yet ready for autistic people. As an example, society expects people to be in long-term relationship. Society expects people to participate in parties to indicate that they are friendly. I am very friendly with people, but I
Don't like parties.
don't want to go to parties.
Me too.
Everything you just mentioned seems completely
Yeah.
normal to me.
I was going to say a lot of people, I think now the society, maybe
Most
it's
people,
a different generation, but the younger generation, a lot of people are introverts who don't want to go outside, who like staying at home, who
can't hold a relationship.
And I think with COVID as well, there's a lot of been people who struggled with just being social in general. I think it has kind of changed people's perspective on having those social skills. They're not as common anymore, I feel like. So I think it maybe hasn't reached you yet, but it is slowly progressing, I think, in terms of people accepting that side of stuff.
You just mentioned about COVID, and there were people who were asking me how I coped with COVID, because studies have shown that autistic people were affected more than neurotypical people during the COVID. And one of my work colleagues said, "How are you coping?" I said, I have been preparing for this for my entire life, not going to other people's places.
Yes,
You loved it.
it was great. You know, not the dramatic
No,
part,
not
of it, not the
sickness,
sad part,
but
the
yeah, I get
staying
you.
home was great. Yeah. What support is available for children and adults who have diagnosed autism and for those who have undiagnosed autism?
I am aware of autism groups and neurodiversity networks in universities that provide support to people with autism. I am not aware of any special support to autistic people from the government. For example, I would have expected the government to give special support to develop communication skills for autistic people, or run campaigns that would essentially make autistic people acceptable to the society. I have not heard of those things. Currently, the parents have to wait for a long time to get a diagnosis of autism in their children. And I think if autistic children have intellectual disabilities, they may get some support from the government. But if they do not have intellectual disabilities and their language is passable, I don't think they are getting any special support from the government.
The only support I'm aware of is speech and language therapy and maybe an EHC plan, just monitoring steps in children throughout the year. But yeah, they really don't get the help they need, which is really sad.
It caters to some people with autism, but not to other people with autism. I can speak and write literally, but it's the semantic language that I have difficulty in processing. So I wouldn't qualify for language and speech therapy, for example.
It is a vast spectrum as well. There's some people who are, from your first introduction with them, you can see they're autistic, and then there's some who you find out later are autistic and you're just so surprised, which I've had both cases. So it really is an interesting thing.
This comes back to camouflaging.
Right.
It puts a lot of strain on autistic people. I am now open about being autistic, and I am free to talk in the way that I like to talk. That is because I have reached a position where I feel society will respect me, regardless of whether I am autistic or not. But for someone who has not achieved that status, I think it puts a lot of pressure on them and could be a reason for poor mental health. And certainly people who are not able to make that adjustment will probably be at very high risk of poor mental health.
Someone who's autistic, who doesn't know that they're autistic, is there anything, would you give any advice, be like, trust your instinct if you know that you have something, or what advice would you give to someone who doesn't have support to be maybe you should get tested, but they feel like they might be, what advice would you give them? Just say, go with your gut, or research more on it. What advice would you give?
You have to be careful at what you're wishing for. For example, in my family, the force is strong. I have, at every single generation in my family, there is at least one autistic person. There are some people who were undiagnosed, and there are some people who don't want to be diagnosed as autistic. So the first thing you have to remember is, what are the implications for you? Do you really want a diagnosis of autism? And if you say, okay, I'm happy to live with that diagnosis, then I would say get tested. At present, I don't think there is a lot of support around that, simply because the symptoms are vague, particularly at that age of diagnosis, when you would expect children to have some social anxieties in the beginning, and the GP might rightly say, well, that's part of development. So it's important not to get frustrated at those times, and see how these developments happen, and revisit the question after some time. At the end of the day, it might be that, for example, I didn't even know that I could have a diagnosis of autism, and certainly one member of my family doesn't want to be diagnosed as autistic. So it's something that you have to think carefully of, about what the societal repercussions are, and workplace repercussions are, and that's an individual decision whether to get tested and be diagnosed as autistic or not.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be diagnosed so you can get the support that you need. But then there are people who can function and go by their day-to-day life and have autism, and they don't want a diagnosis, which is fine. But for other people who are really falling behind and really need support, you need a diagnosis to get any of that support.
Yes, absolutely. In autism, there is high functioning autism. There are others who have intellectual disabilities, and when people have intellectual disabilities, it's important to have a diagnosis so they get the right support. But people with high functioning autism may consider things in different perspectives.
I was wondering if autism was higher in adults or in children.
Autism diagnosis is made typically with an average age of 5 years. There are lots of adults who go undiagnosed as autistic people because they are high functioning. So, as an example, the one possible reason why I was never diagnosed as autism when I was a child is because I was the closest in terms of behavior to my grandmother, who was an extremely successful doctor. So I got away with a lot of things that many people with autism would not get away with. Just because I resembled her in my behavior, people sort of accepted that I was the closest to her in my family in terms of behavior and accepted my behavior.
So you said that you didn't disclose that you're autistic in your professional career until you reached a certain point, and then you felt like you was safe to do so. So what advice would you give to people who are autistic or even undiagnosed, just have a feeling that they're autistic, and they're going into the workplace and they're not sure if they should disclose this in the fear of being treated differently or missing out on opportunities?
I think disclosing that you have autism can be a problem in the workplace and in the society. You have to weigh the pros and cons yourself. The situation might be different in different scenarios. I was comfortable disclosing this only after I reached a certain position because I felt it was safe to do so. I didn't feel safe to disclose this earlier than that because of the negative perceptions about autism. So it is a decision that each individual has to make for themselves as to whether they are ready to disclose that they have autism.
And also it depends on the line of work that you do as well. I know there's some workplaces that are more accepting. There are some workplaces that are very inviting towards people. Like I work with a lot of autistic people and we're very encouraging and helpful towards them and considerate. So also it depends the environment you're in as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a decision that you can only make considering all the entire situation with you. Whether, for example, I still had a doubt whether neurotypical people would accept me as a leader despite all my achievements. My work colleagues encouraged me to apply for leadership positions, and I am head of research in the division of surgery at UCL. So,
Done amazing things.
Thank you.
Well done. That was all for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something the way that we did. I have been your host, Iman.
Shakira.
Thank you to our special guest, Kurinchi. I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And we have been
Oh,
Pod.